Hello, everybody. Hope you're doing well today. I don't know how much programming I will actually do, but we shall see. We shall see.
Do I have some giant breaking news for you guys? I mean, wow. Wow. You go to sleep, you wake up, and it's like seven tremendously gargantuan stories. Probably going to be kicked out of Tesla. And the other thing is, and this drives me crazy that other people don't realize this, is that the guy's always been a fraud. I mean, you go watch the Thunderfoot YouTube videos on Elon Musk, and he goes like, scam for scam. This guy's been scamming people for like over a decade. He comes up with this big new idea. Oh, it'll be released in a year, and then it never gets released. But he raised tens of millions of dollars for the idea. People get screwed. He does what's called vaporware, right? Like,
Same thing with the wall. Where is it?
oh, I came up with this great thing, and we're going to sell it. Give me money. And then they give him the money, and then he doesn't sell it, and then he moves on to the next thing, right? This is what he does. So huge con artist, basically being completely unmasked here. I think not only does this, make it so he can't be involved in politics anymore, as there's been hints of that recently that he's like stepping back, but he's being forced to step back. But this is also going to hurt his businesses. This is going to hurt his reputation. It's now up in flames, right? He only got to this high level of reputation from a whole bunch of PR fluff nonsense, right? And then now it all comes tumbling down because you already alienated and isolated everybody on the left and every liberal in the country. And then now it looks like the right is turning on you, MAGA is turning on you. And where are you going to turn? Well, my suspicion is he's going to try to do a face turn again, right? He's going to try to, like, now he's probably going to talk about things he saw behind the scenes within the Trump regime and blow the whistle on them and call them out. And look, I'm more than happy to listen to what he has to say and report it to you guys. But the fact of the matter is, nobody should ever allow him into polite society again. People on the left and liberals should not welcome him with open arms. Yes, we can listen to his stories about the Trump regime. Yes, we can, accurately report on them. I'm sure he's going to tell the truth about a lot of the crazy stuff he's seen behind the scenes. But do not ever pretend like this guy.
He's a proven liar. He like lies about silly things, even how good he is at video games. He plays FIFA.
Guy is one of us. Like, this guy means well. This guy has the deaths of hundreds of thousands, or actually in the long term, millions of people on his hands. He's the reason we cut pediatric cancer research. He's the reason we got rid of, or we defunded the CFPB, the anti-scam police. He's the reason we got rid of our top nuclear safety officials. But absolutely devastating, man. So go read the New York Times piece. Also, go read the Rolling Stones piece. Read every piece that just came out on
Hello,
Elon
Abba.
Musk.
Hope you're
Because the
doing
Trump
well
regime is
today.
putting the knife in and they're twisting. And it is incredibly glorious. I am absolutely here for it. I can't wait to hear more. I can't wait to hear Elon stuff, because I'm sure he's going to talk about some crazy ass shit that Trump did, some crazy ass shit that the people in the regime did, some crazy shit they said, because now it's war. Now it's war.
Got a little issue with my spawning. Need to fix. I'm a little tired. I might piddle with it.
Holy shit. Okay. By the way, also, I wanted to point this out. So, we learned yesterday that this is in raw story here. Rumors are swirling as Stephen Miller's wife left the White House to work for Elon Musk.
One thing I'm certain of is that you're evil! Thank you for crafting this sword for me.
Well, we may have the source of a lot of these claims now, right? Stephen Miller's probably blowing the whistle on Elon because this story came out. It's basically like, Stephen Miller is a cuck. He's been cucked by Elon. Elon basically, he's Mr. Steal Your Girl. He stole his girl, right? And so maybe Stephen Miller is the one who originated these claims. But also, to be clear, I 100% believe the claims. I'm sure he's an absolute colossal drug addict because it explains a lot of his actions. Okay, so let me give you some other stuff here, guys. Some horrible news. The Supreme Court is going to let the Trump regime end humanitarian programs that allowed 500,000 immigrants to live and work in the U.S. legally. So now 500,000 people face imminent deportation. Basically, what this means is these people were legal under a certain program under the Biden administration, but now under the Trump regime, they're saying Trump has the authority to take these people from legal immigrant status and make it illegal immigrant status, right? That's basically what they're saying. But yet again, it just proves from the beginning, as we pointed out, the idea he was only ever going to go after illegal immigrants was a total farce. I mean, some people thought he's only going to go after illegal immigrants and they have to be violent criminals. Wrong. He's also going after legal immigrants. He's also gone after U.S. citizens, deported a 4-year-old American citizen with cancer. Remember that? So just a horrible, horrible thing. And my guess is, look, this is the Supreme Court. I really think it's tactical on their part. They feel like if we give Trump some wins, then when we give him the losses, that he'll accept them. But that's not how it works.
It's no secret that tech companies are racing to build artificial general intelligence, or AGI, that can match a human brain without needing a lifeline. But here's the kicker. Our brains already have the home field advantage. They do the same heavy lifting with just a fraction of the resources. Whether it's energy, water, land, components, or, money, human brains are just way better and cheaper. Scientists figured this out long before we were arguing with ChatGPT about sandwich recipes. And now with the AI race heating up faster than a server farm in August, biotechnologists are asking, why build AI like a brain when you could just use the real thing? Right now, you can either buy a human brain cell-based computer or rent time on a remote one. Yes, even BrainPower's got a subscription plan these days. So what can these computers actually do? How do they work? And most importantly, should we be freaking out just a little bit? I'm Matt Farrell. Welcome to Undecided. This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Got a spare $35,000 in a lab coat laying around? Well, you could be the proud owner of a CL1, which is a biocomputer from Australia's Cortical Labs. Unlike your regular computer, which is running on a BIOS.
Hey, I hear somebody in there. Open up.
You're scaring them.
I'm not scary.
In all caps, the CL1 runs on a BIOS, or Biological Intelligence Operating System, because instead of just mimicking a brain, it literally uses one. It's packed with living human neurons, which are cells that react, learn, and adapt inside of a simulated world. It's like a real brain, minus the existential dread. Hopefully. And Cortical Labs isn't the only one making living computers. Final Spark over in Switzerland is also training human neurons in the form of brain organoids. These are tiny clusters of living brain cells that you can rent for research. I even talked to a few researchers using these systems, and trust me, it's as weird and fascinating as it sounds. Before we get in too deep into the how, let's ask the obvious, why? Why go through all the trouble of growing brain cells when we have perfectly good silicon computers? According to Cortical Labs CEO Han-Wang Chang, it's simple. Everyone is racing to build AGI, but the only true AGI we know of is biological intelligence, or human intelligence. But there's a bigger, messier reason too: sustainability. Generative AI eats everything: more energy, more water, more land, more chips. It's a runaway resource hog, and it's only getting worse. It's something I dug into recently in another video if you want a full breakdown. But tech companies aren't slowing down, they're scaling up. However, you can only expand so far before you start stepping on toes. Data centers aren't just hogging electricity, they're draining water, eating up land, and putting stress on local communities. In early 2024, OpenAI CEO Sam Altman put it bluntly: we do need way more energy in the world than I think we thought we needed before, and I think we still don't appreciate the energy needs of this technology. The good news, to the degree that there's good news, is there's no way to get there without a breakthrough. Final Spark's Fred Jordan thinks he's found it: living neurons. If we can train biocomputers like traditional AI, Jordan says we could slash AI's energy use by thousands of times, making its carbon footprint almost invisible. And to really see why that matters, let's talk numbers. Meet the Frontier, America's first exascale supercomputer. It cranks out 1.1 exaflops. That's a quintillion calculations per second, while weighing 266 metric tons, stretching across 74 cabinets, and costing $600 million to build. Now compare that to your brain. 1.3 kilograms, or about 3 pounds, 20 watts of power, 1 exaflop of raw performance, and a price tag that just says, not applicable. Seriously, David Byrne was right. We're making flippy floppy. And Cortical Labs gets it. Their motto: What digital AI models spend tremendous resources trying to emulate? We begin with. Forget AGI, they're chasing SBI, or synthetic biological intelligence. But how are they doing this? Well, before we dive into how these brain computers actually work, it's a good idea to know how to program them. And there's something that can really help you do just that with today's sponsor, Brilliant. Brilliant helps you get smarter every day with thousands of interactive lessons in math, science, programming, data analysis, and AI. The best part is how Brilliant teaches through hands-on problem solving that lets you play with the concepts. Learning by doing is proven to be 6 times more effective than watching a lecture. You build up your critical thinking skills, which helps make you a better thinker. It's been crafted by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, and professionals from Stanford, MIT, Caltech, Microsoft, Google, and more. Build up your problem-solving skills with courses in a wide range of topics like programming, which is constantly evolving, just like we're talking about today. Learn to think like a programmer by breaking down complex problems into manageable chunks of code. Develop your intuition for computer logic so you can design and debug real programs, and get familiar with Python to start building programs on your first day. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/undecided or scan the QR code on the screen. Or you can click on the link in the description too. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. I absolutely love Brilliant and think you will too. Thanks to Brilliant and to all of you for supporting the channel. All right, so how do you turn skin cells into neurons inside a computer? Now, biocomputing sounds promising for efficiency, but what actually is a biocomputer? In 2024, Han Wing Chong called the CL1 a body in a box. And no, it's not a horror movie prop floating in a glass jar. The neurons inside are actually stem cells, or rather, they were stem cells before scientists reprogrammed them. Now here's the basic rundown. The human body has a few types of stem cells. Embryonic stem cells exist during early development, while adults have stem cells in places like skin and bone marrow, producing new cells on demand. And once these stem cells specialize into a particular role, like skin cells, they normally stay that way. That ability to specialize into anything is called pluripotency. For a long time, researchers thought mature human cells couldn't revert back into their original state. Then in 2012, Kyoto University's Shinya Yamanaka won a Nobel Prize for proving otherwise. By flipping a specific set of genes, he turned ordinary mouse skin cells back into pluripotent stem cells, ready to become anything again. A complete biological reset. And yes, it works for humans too.
This is summer with the Nissan Summer Sales Event, featuring the award-winning Rogue and Pathfinder, now more affordable. Hurry to a Nissan dealer today.
My name's Ethan. I started smoking menthol cigarettes to be just like the cool guys in the ads. Here's my tip. There's nothing cool about smoking and having a stroke.
That's exactly how Cortical Labs and Frontal Spark grow their neurons. The process kicks off with dedifferentiation. Researchers sample blood or skin cells from adult volunteers. They reprogram them into induced pluripotent stem cells, or iPSCs. Then through weeks of careful incubation and gene tweaking, sadly there's no epic training montage here, the cells slowly transform. Finally, researchers differentiate the iPSCs again, this time steering them toward becoming neural progenitor cells. Basically, baby neurons in training that, if they pass the tests, move on to the next stage. As Cortical Labs explains it, once the cells are about ready to turn into neurons, the researchers move them onto a multi-electrode array, or MEA chip. The cells attach to the chip, allowing electrical signals to both be sent to them and received from them. For a few months, they continue to develop, and then bam, human neurons merged with silicon. It doesn't get much more sci-fi than that. So what's the whole point of this process? Well, it's to build brain organoids, which are miniature 3D tissue cultures modeled after real organs. Researchers use organoids to study how organs like kidneys, lungs, and even brains develop and function. Think of them like those plastic models that you saw in biology class, except these ones are alive. They eat, they grow, they create waste, and eventually they die. Now, to be clear, these aren't fully formed human brains, not even close. There's a reason they're called organoids and not organs. They're organ-like. Organoids are tiny, limited to specific brain regions and cap out around 5 million cells, about the size of half a centimeter. By comparison, your brain has around 86 billion neurons, plus another 85 billion non-neuronal cells. So yeah, it's tiny. When it comes to synthetic neurons, there's a lot more nuance than I can fit in here. Cortical Labs actually breaks it down step by step on their YouTube channel if you really want to nerd out. Their short version, it takes months of careful work. Final Spark's timeline clocks in at about 4 months to create a single brain organoid. And just as the CO1 hit the market, MIT researchers announced something wild. They figured out how to skip the stem cell stage altogether by generating neurons directly from skin cells. If it scales, this shortcut could make neuron production way faster and cheaper for biocomputing. In the end, the goal is to tap brain organoids as an alternative to AI, or what some are calling organic intelligence, or OI. Now you might be thinking, what about the ethics of growing mini brains in the lab? It's a good question, and it's something researchers across biotech, neuroscience, and philosophy are struggling to answer too. Before we wander too far down that rabbit hole, let's first talk about what you can actually do with these things. Outside of building SBI, OI, biocomputing, wetware, whatever you want to call it, brain organoids are already making waves in medical research. Scientists are using them to model diseases, test new drugs, explore gene therapies, and push the boundaries of personalized medicine. And someday advances here could even help reduce the need for animal testing. As for biocomputers like the CL1, Cortical Labs and Final Spark are betting big on them as a greener alternative to today's resource-hungry AI, or at least that's their pitch. So what can you actually do with a biocomputer right now? Well, in the world of computing, milestones usually come dressed up as games. Alan Turing's imitation game inspired the Turing test. IBM's Deep Blue made headlines by beating chess champion Garry Kasparov in 1997. Then DeepMind's AlphaGo took down Go master Lee Sedol in 2016. And now, meet DishBrain, Cortical Labs' tiny living player. It doesn't stand tall like Deep Blue, which its creator famously compared to an office refrigerator back in 1995. It doesn't need 1,202 CPUs like AlphaGo did, and it definitely doesn't hog 7,300 square feet like Frontier, the world's first exascale supercomputer. DishBrain fits inside, well, a petri dish. By 2022, it could play Pong. Now here's the breakout breakdown. During DishBrain's development, Cortical Labs studied human and mouse neurons grown on MEA chips. The idea, based on the free energy principle, which says intelligent systems prefer predictability, they trained the neurons to learn how to play Pong using electrical feedback. The setup actually mirrors how we interpret the world. We get sensory input, our brains translate it into electrical signals, and we respond. DishBrain's neurons did the same thing inside a simulated game world. When the neurons missed the ball, they got hit with random, unpredictable signals, 4 seconds of 150 millivolts at 5 hertz. Not exactly emotional punishment, but more like getting a foul called and hearing static instead of a whistle. When they successfully intercepted the ball, they got a reward, a clean, smooth sine wave at 100 hertz for 100 milliseconds. And the more sensory input they had, the better they performed. When there was no feedback at all, the performance just flatlined. Cortical Labs argues this shows DishBrain wasn't just reacting, it was learning. Not well enough to beat you at Pong yet, but still it's pretty wild. Like a lot of biocomputing, the theoretical neuroscience behind Cortical Labs' work is a rabbit hole way too deep for one video.
Do you know QuickBooks Online can streamline your business finances? With your financial accounts and apps in one place, you can see where your business stands. And 86% of customers say QuickBooks helps them simplify their business tasks. Learn more about QuickBooks Online.
I've got something to tell you. I have cancer.
That one word can change everything. But there are 2 words that can change cancer. Clinical trials. 2 words that anyone can bring up. Because when we're up against it, we need all the help we can get.
But if you want a full biotech deep dive someday, let me know. For now, let's put down the journal articles and talk about something more hands-on. Despite the CL1's $35,000 price tag and the fact that you need to be a legit researcher to buy one, interacting with biocomputers isn't as locked down as you might think. For starters, the CL1's API documentation is publicly available on GitHub. Plus, both Final Spark and Cortical Labs run public Discord servers where you can ask questions, swap notes, and geek out with others. If you don't have a lab budget, both companies are offering subscription services to rent remote access to their living neural networks. There are some caveats though. Final Spark's platform is live but subject to approval. Cortical Labs' rental service is still gearing up. Right now, Final Spark lists 10 universities as official users of its neural platform. Now, I had a chance to talk to 2 research teams using FinalSpark's system, which lets them work with brain organoids remotely. First up is Dr. Kyle Wedgwood and research intern Victor Wyjuk at the University of Exeter in England. Wedgwood's a mathematician specializing in neuroscience, and he's using FinalSpark's organoids to explore what he calls the fundamentals of how neurons actually work.
And here it's really trying to ask the question about what can we import from sort of mathematical descriptions of things like neuronal networks and use them to understand how neuronal networks work, how cells communicate with each other, but also how can we exert some sort of control or some modulation in a sort of targeted way on neuronal networks.
When I asked what training neurons looks like, Wedgwood pointed right back to Cortical Labs' Pong study.
Over time, if you stimulate these networks, they respond in a way by effectively strengthening and weakening different kind of connections between neurons. So broadly, this is called synaptic plasticity, and it's one of the fundamental ways that brains learn, remember, acquire new skills, all this kind of stuff. Obviously, the neuronal network did not become really, really good at playing Pong, right? It just got better than it was in the beginning. But it did show that actually you can study kind of learning in these systems.
Then I sat down with Dr. Jared Oldshepper from the Artificial Intelligence Data Analysis and Systems, or ADAS, Institute at Oxford Brookes University. As a computational neuroscientist, Shepard's digging into how biological systems store and represent information and whether they might someday outperform our traditional computers.
Each cell, individual cell, solves a huge number of computational tasks every moment in time. You know, we have a lot of knowledge about the biochemistry, the molecules involved, the structure of a lot of those things as well. That's getting more apparent as well. But how they actually interact with each other, how they combine with each other to create this complex system and do that to solve complex problems is still quite fairly much unclear. So from my point of view is if we have a better understanding how each of those components work by letting each part of this component decide for itself what its best behavior should be, and I mean behavior in a dynamic sense, so how it changes over time.
So there's a glimpse of how researchers are already putting biocomputers to work. But here's the fun part. You don't need a PhD or a grant to get involved. If FinalSpark likes your project enough, you could potentially work with them for free. They also host a 24/7 live stream of some of their neurons online. So yes, you can literally watch a petri dish. Could be better than some screensavers. Now, looking for something a little flashier? FinalSpark also offers the Butterfly, a 3D simulation showing about 10,000 neurons reacting to sensory input in real time. Basically, it's like controlling a virtual RC car, except your remote is a clump of neurons. And don't worry, heavy emphasis on virtual. It's just visuals. Of course, FinalSpark's co-founder Fred Jordan is quick to remind everyone this tech is very early days. It's not going to replace your phone or laptop anytime soon, and it might never. As Jordan's joked, running Windows on a brain organoid would be unrealistic. No word yet, though, if it can run Doom. Still, Jordan's point is worth remembering. The inventors of the semiconductor had no idea what the world would eventually build on top of it.
That's new. Join me, my friend.
What are you doing?
We are living la vida loca.
Oh, do you mean la dolce vita?
Hmm?
Is this your idea?
Enjoy the intense flavor of Lavazza Dolce Vita.
Oh, grazie.
Is this Las Vegas?
Venice.
I'm confused.
That is good.
That's exactly the scary part, isn't it? All the what ifs. I'm guessing you don't need me to invent hypotheticals. You've probably already thought of a few yourself. The biggest one for me? How would we even know if a brain organoid achieved consciousness? If it did, what then? Well, I've got good news and bad news. The bad news, we have no idea what we're doing. The good news, we have no idea what we're doing. We don't even have a solid definition for human consciousness yet. Cortical Labs is actually running a public survey to tackle this exact problem. Without a shared language, it's tough to even describe biotech research properly, especially when terms like sentience, consciousness, and thinking trigger emotional reactions. Who gets to decide what counts as thinking? What's the threshold for sentience? Here's your chance to toss in your 2 cents. That said, and I really can't emphasize this enough, we're nowhere close to needing an emergency shutdown button. Brain organoids, even at their best today, are tiny. Compared to real brains, that is. Their networks aren't even on the same playing field as a bird, a mouse, a snake, or even an insect. No disrespect to the humble fruit fly. As Dr. Shepard put it,
we have made progress in trying to understand what we can and cannot do. So at the moment, it's not something that we can make them push to do anything that is even remotely related to what intact brains or even slices or parts of brain can do, because those have been trained and accommodating.
So where does biocomputing land on NASA's technology readiness scale? Well, short answer, very much still in the lab. Biocomputers like the CL1 and FileSpark's neural platform are under active development. Researchers using them are basically beta testers and giving feedback, suggesting improvements, and helping the developers build it in real time. It's a true collaboration between scientists and startups. Zooming out even further, biocomputing as a whole is still barely scratching the surface. It's an emerging science, a little like quantum computing, or the quietly growing comeback of analog computing. Right now, we're standing at the top of the canyon admiring the view. But what's waiting down at the bottom? No one knows yet, and hopefully not anything with too many mouths that can't scream. Biocomputing and biotech more broadly is way too big to cover fully in one sitting. If this video fired up your neurons, I'll be publishing some more of the interviews over on Still to Be Determined, which is my follow-up podcast. We can go much deeper into the strengths, challenges, and wild possibilities of brain organoids. And honestly, there's still so much out there to explore. But what do you think? Does the concept of SBI bring you hope? Or are we better off sticking to silicon before organoids totally flop? Jump into the comments and let me know. And be sure to listen to my follow-up podcast, Still to Be Determined. We'll keep this conversation going. Thanks as always to my patrons for your continued support and helping to keep the channel going. Keep your mind open, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.
Bigger isn't always better. Smaller AI models can deliver the right results and help reduce AI costs up to 90%. Be AI built for business. IBM.
Better?
Yes, better.
The book is called Apple in China, the capture of the world's greatest company. I've got to tell you something. You know, I'm not much of a reader. I was going to wait for the movie to come out. But honestly, like, this is jaw-dropping.
Yeah.
This book is jaw-dropping.
Fresh water may soon flow from the depths of the ocean to drought-stricken coastal cities. A handful of companies are betting that crushing deep-sea pressures can replace the energy-hungry pumps and toxic chemicals that are desalination's inconvenient truth. By going the extra quarter mile into the ocean, they're pioneering a way to turn salt water into fresh water, slashing costs, curbing pollution, and reducing environmental harm in the process. How on Earth or under Earth does this even work? And could it solve our global water crisis? I'm Matt Farrell. Welcome to Undecided. This video is brought to you by Incogni. A handful of companies are looking to replace the pump-driven pressure of a reverse osmosis, or RO, desalination system with deep-sea pressures using 400 meters or about 1,300 feet of hydrostatic pressure as an alternative energy source to powering those pumps with fossil fuels. You know that pain in your ears when you dive to the bottom of a swimming pool? Well, now multiply that by 100. That's the kind of force that these companies are harnessing. They plan to install entire farms of desalination pods on the seafloor, like those 13-meter or 40-foot tall pods that have been designed by Oceanwell in California. Before getting into exactly how they're doing this, there's the question of why? Why dive to these depths when we can already do RO on shore? Well, the southwestern US is suffering from drought so severe that Lake Mead, the largest reservoir in the Colorado River Basin, has 150-foot tall bathtub rings around its edges, marking where the water level stood just a few decades ago. 40 million people in 7 states rely on the Colorado River, but the lands it flows through are the driest they've been in 1,200 years. The water crisis is reshaping daily life, stalling hydropower plants, triggering citywide water restrictions, and driving farmers to abandon their fields. History is full of civilizations brought to their knees by water shortages. The ancestral Puebloans abandoned their massive cliff dwellings in the American Southwest after decades of dry years. A mega drought helped to topple the Ming Dynasty in China. And the Dust Bowl of the 1930s saw much of the Great Plains become an unlivable wasteland. But whereas these droughts lasted less than 20 years each, the Southwest is in its 25th year with no end in sight. Earth's climate is changing, and multi-year droughts are becoming much more frequent, more severe, and more expensive as they continue to spread. Each year, an additional area the size of Vermont and New Hampshire combined succumbs to drought. Yet global populations keep growing and urbanizing, placing even greater demands on limited water supplies. The question is, what are we going to do about it? What we're doing right now works, but it has its challenges. For instance, on California's coast, the Carlsbad desalination plant is stepping in where the Colorado River is falling short, turning salt water into fresh water to cover 7% of San Diego County's needs. It's part of a growing global trend, desalinating seawater and brackish water to supply fresh water for drinking, industry, and even agriculture. In 2024, roughly 21,000 desalination plants operated across roughly 150 countries from the United States to Southeast Asia, with half of the world's desalination capacity located in the Middle East and North Africa. More than 3/4 of these plants use a technique called reverse osmosis, or RO, as I mentioned before. Well, RO forces salt water against a membrane with microscopic pores that let water molecules through but hold back the larger salts, as well as microbes and chemical contaminants. It sounds like a simple solution, but RO comes with some major complications. The first is that it requires a massive amount of energy. RO relies on powerful pumps to brute force water through a membrane, and that takes a lot of electricity, about 3 kilowatt hours per cubic meter or 260 gallons. Back in 2016, global desalination capacity stood at 38 billion cubic meters per year, consuming roughly 75 terawatt hours of electricity.
Starting at $399.99. Some say you can't have it all. Clearly, they've never been here. Here, every world, every story is too good to miss. This is where unbelievable shows up to play. This place, it's different from the rest. Once you're in it, there's no going back. Play the unmissable on PlayStation 5.
Coming soon, an entire neighborhood built the right way by equipment built the right way, featuring the world's #1 selling compact excavator, the powerful, reliable Kubota construction lineup.
As much as the entire country of Chile used that same exact year. And with freshwater demand rising, capacity is expected to more than double by 2050. But with great power comes great emissions. RO plants rely almost entirely on fossil fuels, making desalination a major source of CO2, nitrogen, and sulfur dioxides, and small particulates. In 2016 alone, desalination plants emitted 76 million tons of CO2, a number expected to surge to 218 million tons per year by 2040. And the obvious solution would be to turn to renewable energy. The world's first large-scale RO plant powered by solar panels was completed in Saudi Arabia in 2018 with enough capacity for 150,000 people. But at night, when the sun goes down, the plant's environmental impact goes up as it switches to grid power. So when we can't use the sun, where do we find a 100% sustainable, round-the-clock power source? Well, look no further than Ocean Well's desalinating pods in the depths of the ocean. But before we plunge into that deep-sea solution, literally, let's take a quick break. Because while the ocean might solve our water crisis, today's sponsor is focused on something a little more personal, your digital privacy. Now, I was stuck under a massive amount of unwanted spam messages for a long time. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Well, today's sponsor, Incogni, can help you get to the source of the problem and restore some of your privacy. As my wife and I will use code UNDECIDED at the link below and get 60% off an annual plan. Thanks to Incogni and to all of you for supporting the channel. All right, so let's dive in. Now, this is where we come back to Ocean Well's 13-meter pods desalinating water on the ocean floor. The idea of deep sea RO, or DSRO, is as old as RO itself. Back in the 1960s, the thought of installing and powering pumps at depth was just a bit too far out. Today, that's no longer the case. At places like the Ormenlange gas field off Norway's coast, wellheads on the seafloor connect to a shared subsea hub that supplies electricity and pumps the gas ashore through a pipeline. It's the same hub and spoke model now being proposed for deep sea desalination. This all works because companies like Norway's F-Subsea have developed pumps that both stay watertight at extraordinary depths and rarely need maintenance. Also headquartered in Norway is Flotion, which is a direct spin-off of F-Subsea, taking technology originally designed to extract fossil fuels and repurposing it to pull fresh water from the ocean more sustainably. Now, this is still reverse osmosis, but about 40% more energy efficient at only 1.7 to 2.1 kilowatt hours per cubic meter of fresh water. That's because instead of building pressure against the saltwater side of the membrane, deep sea RO pumps get a much easier task, creating suction on the freshwater side to keep water flowing through and moving towards the shore. Beyond these energy and cost savings, another Norwegian company, Waterize, expects that moving RO offshore will shrink the land area needed by 80 to 95%. That's crucial in urban areas like Los Angeles, where Oceanwell is partnering with the Las Virgenes Municipal Water District to build its first deep-sea water farm. Space is also at a premium along the built-up shores of the Mediterranean and on the tiny island nation of the Maldives. 2 locations that Flow Ocean is targeting for its own deep-sea RO pods. While deep-sea RO doesn't need much land, it does need depth, 300 to 600 meters of it, or about 1,000 to 2,000 feet. And to reach that, Flow Ocean says its RO pods will sit up to 6 miles or 10 kilometers offshore. That means miles of pipelines to shore and long, expensive umbilical cables to deliver power to the pumps, which is one reason deep-sea RO has not been done at scale to be cost-effective. But Oceanwell's CTO, Michael Porter, imagines a time when these underwater RO farms run off offshore wind. Instead of relying on the grid, they'd pull power from turbines spinning nearby, cutting costs and reducing their onshore footprint even more. If you're questioning the environmental impact of putting RO pods on the seafloor, consider the alternative, because traditional RO has a serious sustainability problem. Land-based RO burns through huge amounts of energy to pressurize water against a membrane. That means plants have an economic incentive to squeeze as much fresh water as possible. 50% of their intake goes back into the ocean, carrying 100% of the original salts. That's a doubly salty brine, not even mentioning the chemical cocktail used to pre-treat seawater before it even reaches the membrane. This heavy brine sinks to the seafloor, stressing fish and other sea creatures that aren't adapted to such extreme salinities. And as water gets saltier, it holds less oxygen, suffocating life on the seabed. Now, this is a massive problem. Over 155 million tons of brine get dumped into the ocean every single day. Some plants blast brine into coastal waters to mix it more thoroughly, while others trickle it along the shoreline or dilute it with other wastewater discharges. But instead of just managing brine, deep-sea RO disperses it altogether. Because deep-sea pressures are unlimited, there's no pressure to squeeze every last drop of fresh water out of the salt water the same way land-based RO plants do. Oceanwell claims that its system merely sips salt water, returning 85 to 95% of it back to the ocean with only a slight increase in salinity. And to keep the brine from settling on the seafloor or drifting back into the intake, Oceanwell's pods pump it higher into the water column where currents carry it away. And those nasty pre-treatment chemicals that I mentioned, well, deep-sea RO dodges them entirely, thanks to one key difference from land-based systems.
Hey, I hear somebody in there. Open up.
You're scaring them.
I'm not scary.
With Shark FlexBreeze fans, there's 2 ways to chill. ProMist drops outdoor temps by up to 12 degrees. HydroGo brings cool evaporative mist indoors or out, both with long-lasting runtime and up to 70 feet of power. Bring the breeze where you need it most.
RO membranes clog easily from microorganisms in seawater and mineral buildup. To prevent this, land-based RO plants pre-filter the seawater with plastic-based filters. Then they add biocides like chlorine to kill the microbes, but because chlorine damages RO membranes, it has to be neutralized with yet another chemical, bisulfite. You're basically treating the treatment at that point. More chemicals adjust the water's pH, and scale inhibitors keep minerals like carbonate and phosphate from clogging pipes up. It all adds up. But deep-sea RO pares it back down. These RO pods sit in the perpetual darkness of the ocean's twilight zone, where algae doesn't grow and oxygen levels stay low. With so little life at these depths, Flotion and Oceanwell expect that the membranes will stay clean without chemical treatment. Even so, Ocean Well is taking extra steps to protect what little life exists at these depths. The company is developing an intake system that draws seawater through a series of increasingly finer filters and flushes out any marine life that's trapped along the way. This catch and release method is designed to return plankton and larvae to the ecosystem while also keeping the filters clear and reducing membrane fouling to keep the pods running maintenance free for as long as possible. That said, there's yet another sustainability leak deep sea RO hasn't plugged. Even with all these safeguards, RO membranes don't last forever. There's still consumables that need to be replaced every 5 to 10 years. A 2016 study estimated that 14,000 tons of discarded membranes end up in landfills each year, a number that has only grown as RO desalination has expanded. So what happens when the system eventually clogs up? And how would they even know? Well, Ocean Well says the same umbilical cord that supplies power from shore will send data back from sensors on each pod. These sensors will allow Ocean Well to monitor performance in real time and shut individual pods down as needed, until they can be swapped out for fresh ones. And for now, Ocean Well is focusing on perfecting its filtration system in hopes of a maintenance-free pod. It plans to launch a pilot in 2026, with its first commercial plant serving Los Angeles by 2028. The facility is expected to produce 95,000 cubic meters, or about 25 million gallons per day. That's 28,000 acre-feet per year. Double that to a full-scale farm, and it could supply enough fresh water for a small city. If you're wondering whether replacing pods in pitch-black darkness under crushing pressures a quarter-mile deep is complicated, it definitely is. But with decades of subsea experience, Flocean and Waterize are already lowering RO systems onto the seabed. Flocean recently wrapped up a 4-month pilot demonstration at depth and is now preparing to launch a 1,000 cubic meter a day or 260,000 gallon commercial demonstration. So we may be close to having fresh water on tap from the abyss. The age of desalination is here, and the challenge now is making it in an efficient and sustainable way. Deep Sea RO promises to deliver on both, but while it might keep coastal communities afloat, inland regions will still be left high and dry. And to truly secure water in the face of worsening droughts, we can't just make more. We need to make the most of what we do have. That means conserving water, treating and reusing wastewater, and making every drop count. But what do you think? Is DSRO the future of freshwater, or is the idea a lot more shallow once you take a deeper look? Jump in the comments and let me know. And be sure to listen to my follow-up podcast, Still to be Determined, while we'll keep this conversation going. Thanks as always to my patrons for your continued support and helping to keep the channel going. Keep your mind open, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one.
You need to get somebody quick before one of them kills again.
Fire isn't just an element. Fire is an organism. Fire watches. Fire waits.
Investigator Goodson, your reputation precedes you.
Yeah, you preceded me too. Into my own office.
I've been told you have 2 serial arsonists working this area. No significant leads on either.
Why send you? You don't know anything about arson.
Yeah, but I know a ton about crime scene analysis.
Why is she here again?
You're one man dealing with a fire plague. Accept the help. You need to get somebody quick before one of them kills again.
Serial arsonists tend to be powerless in their own lives. They want other people to know what that feels like. Don't let them in your head.
That's not the kind of guy that gets in my head.
How you feeling lately? You seem a little off.
Here is to the hero!
If I suspected your husband of a crime, would that shock you? What crime would that be? Or what crime do you think he'd be capable of?
should cruise, that's the move.
Every crashing wave delivers a pulse of power. Add them all up, and the ocean carries more energy than the roughly 30,000 terawatt hours of electricity that was generated globally in 2023. But for decades, wave power has been a sea of broken dreams, sunk prototypes, busted budgets, and forgotten startups. Until now. In 2023, buoys from a Swedish company called Core Power survived record-breaking 60-foot waves and kept sending clean power to the grid. They don't just ride the waves, they tune into them, using smart engineering to amplify their motion and squeeze out more energy from every swell. With costs plunging and the first full wave farms on the horizon,
These include the Center. Despite Trump and Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr.'s promises to make America healthy again, some key agencies tasked with ensuring just that have been swept up in the DOJ-led effort to slash and burn federal jobs and budgets. These include the Centers for Disease Control, the Food and Drug Administration, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. These are the three main entities tasked with overseeing the safety and regulation of the massive United States food system, from inspecting poultry to communicating with the public about E. coli outbreaks, for a population of over 330 million people spread across 3.5 million square miles. That is a huge responsibility that necessitates a large, sometimes unwieldy apparatus to monitor. And while it is true that despite the large number of people typically working on monitoring the food system in the US at any given moment, there are still outbreaks and things still slip through the cracks even before Trump was president. But it's not necessarily the size and the cost of that food safety apparatus that is causing the mistakes. And reducing the workforce and attempting to cut costs across the Department of Health and Human Services, parent agency to the CDC and the FDA, and within the USDA, has done very little other than sow chaos since Trump took office a few months ago. For example, the physical locations of FDA testing sites have been downsized, requiring the transport of food samples, causing a lot of confusion, moving scientists around, firing scientists, and hampering the FDA's efforts to monitor the food supply for foodborne illnesses. The CDC has faced major cuts, including to divisions that aggregate data related to food safety. 2 USDA food safety advisory committees have been dismantled. The unit within the Department of Justice that is tasked with overseeing enforcement, investigations, and prosecutions related to consumer safety and negligent handling of food safety, among many other things, was completely disbanded. At every level of our food system, from the scientists testing poultry for salmonella to the consumer protection enforcement mechanisms that keep food producers in check, and everything in between, the Trump administration has been chipping away at regulations, data, expertise, science, and consumer protections that have been decades in the making and that ensure our food system is safe for consumers. Again, mistakes are still made every year. According to KFF Health News, each year about 48 million people in the U.S. get sick with foodborne illnesses. 128,000 are hospitalized and 3,000 die. The U.S. Department of Agriculture estimates the deaths, chronic illness, medical treatment, and lost productivity from food-related illnesses amounted to $75 billion in 2023. $75 billion in a single year lost because of foodborne illness. And of course, 3,000 lives were lost too, but I'm trying to focus on the economic figures that seem to matter most to MAGA. There is nothing being cut from these agencies that will make up for the billions and billions of dollars lost every year due to foodborne illness. And there's no way that the regime's slash and burn approach will result in a safer food system for everyone. The Make America Healthy Again movement is rife with disinformation, and how the media interprets this information can vary greatly depending on the bias of the publication. This headline from Salon caught my eye. Source: I made it up. RFK Jr.'s Maha report cites fabricated studies. It's helpful to see in the Ground News browser extension that this publication leans left. So to get a fuller picture of the story, I can click on Full Coverage. On the Ground News website, I can see that 189 sources are covering this topic, with interpretations varying wildly depending on the bias of the publication. For example, left-leaning Daily Kos uses the headline, "New RFK Jr. Scandal. Maha Report is a steaming pile," while right-leaning The Washington Examiner uses the headline, "Maha Report will be revised following citation errors," downplaying the issue by calling fully made-up information, quote, "citation errors." Depending on where you get your news, you're going to get very different takes on the same story. And if you only pay attention to one side or the other, you might miss the full picture of the national conversation happening around the issue on all sides of the political spectrum. And this is where Ground News comes in and why I've been using them for over a year. Today's partner, Ground News, is an app and website that offers tools to help you critically analyze the news you read, providing context to understand the full picture. By using the Ground News Vantage subscription, I can also see the blind spot feed, where I can see stories disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. For example, almost no right-leaning sources are covering the story, "Well, we are all going to die. Senator Joni Ernst defends Medicaid cuts at Iowa Town Hall." Interesting. I feel better equipped to make sense of what's happening in the world without being influenced by just one perspective. And listen, I'm not the only one who loves Ground News. The Nobel Peace Center even called it an excellent way to stay informed, avoid echo chambers, and expand your worldview. I'm always really impressed with Ground News and genuinely think they're a great resource. If you want to stay informed on U.S. politics and more, subscribe through the QR code or the link below at ground.news/Legia for 40% off this unlimited access Vantage plan. It comes out to $5 per month for unlimited access to all the features I've mentioned. Thanks, Ground News. We are already seeing the very real consequences that come from downsizing the food safety measures in this country. An E. coli outbreak last fall sickened 90 people across 15 states. It put a 9-year-old in the hospital with kidney failure. The inspection and testing period to confirm the type and source of the outbreak concluded in February this year, but the Trump administration made the decision not to publish their findings because none of the infected products were still on shelves. But alerting the public to an outbreak is not just about immediate safety and recalls. According to KFF Health News, quote, "The information is still important because it can prevent more cases, pressure growers to improve sanitation, and identify repeat offenders. It also gives victims an explanation for their illnesses and helps them determine whom they might take legal action against." The government's ability to communicate foodborne illness outbreaks to the public has been hampered by major cutbacks at the FDA and CDC. In fact, earlier this month, it was reported that the FDA failed to publish over a dozen letters they had sent flagging certain hazards at food companies, including potential botulism contamination. This failure happened as a direct result of firings at the FDA. According to NBC, quote, "The federal workers responsible for reviewing the food safety letters before they're posted online were fired. These letters are essential for the FDA to exercise its enforcement powers to hold companies accountable to federal food safety regulations. In fact, since the day after Trump's inauguration, not a single warning letter sent to U.S. food manufacturers has been posted publicly. Without public notice about possible food safety violations, it's impossible for food retailers and the public at large to know whether the food they're selling or consuming has been flagged by the FDA for potential issues. USDA inspectors were also among the tens of thousands of federal employees who were offered a buyout or early retirement in exchange for walking away from their jobs. In a piece published this week, NPR spoke with one of them, a meat and poultry plant inspector in Wisconsin who worked in the role for 38 years. Now, she told NPR, because of these cutbacks, inspectors that once had to inspect 4 plants per day are instead expected to inspect 8 per day, a feat which, according to the inspector, is impossible to do, which means that meat and poultry inspections are either being done hastily or not at all. But in a statement emailed to NPR, the USDA claimed that frontline inspectors and veterinarians from the agency were exempt from the offer of early retirement. They claimed inspectors were not given the opportunity to walk away from the job because of the essential nature of their work. Interesting, considering NPR literally spoke to someone who did. In fact, NPR revealed it had, quote, reviewed emails sent from USDA officials urging inspectors to take the early retirement deal and confirming their eligibility for it, as well as a document listing eligible job categories, including consumer safety inspector and slaughterhouses inspectors. A bold-faced lie coming from the department tasked with making sure there isn't literal shit in my food does not bode well. This on top of chaos at the FDA, where scientists are supposed to test foods for contaminations, and staffing cuts at the CDC, tasked with communicating important foodborne illness outbreaks and recalls with the public, means that every level of our food system, from the fields to the factories to the grocery stores, is less monitored and at greater risk of making all of us sick. In the face of these rollbacks, Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins, who used to serve as ethics advisor to Texas Governor Rick Perry, to give you a sense of her legal acumen, announced gleefully that the USDA has graciously extended funding to the states to manage their own food inspections, a whopping sum of $14.5 million. I reread the announcement a couple of times, and I'm quite certain that sum is the total of all money given to the states in this new wave of funding. If my math is correct, which it rarely is, that's less than $300,000 per state to take over the monumental task that the federal government is abandoning, one that necessarily requires federal oversight because food travels across state lines so frequently, it's impossible for each individual state to adequately oversee the food coming into and going out of its territory. The announcement from the USDA, which assures Americans that this much-needed funding will protect the safety of the meat and poultry on their tables, is nothing short of state-sponsored propaganda, a drop in the bucket fluffed up to look like something more than it is. Meanwhile, outbreaks are happening and the Trump administration is purposefully not reporting them to the public. And it's outright dangerous to leave food safety in the hands of individual states. It silos the states, restricting their access to information and their ability to coordinate efforts to contain new outbreaks. That single E. coli outbreak I mentioned spread across 15 states, each of which may not have known about the other infections had they been solely managing the food safety within their own borders. And when you have states enacting their own food safety measures, that also means food will move through states with varying levels of safety. So you may live in a state with strict food safety standards, but that beef you're eating was produced 5 states away and had to pass through a whole host of varying levels of safety measures to get to your plate. Without a federal apparatus to normalize these standards, the patchwork of regulations it would create would also be unwieldy and bad for health outcomes.
Let me know if this sounds familiar. You see this news story, scroll some more, and see another headline about the cost of Thanksgiving, but
I think the reason why the Trump administration simultaneously claims to want to make America healthy again while cutting back on the very agencies tasked with doing just that is twofold. One, as Adam Serwer pointed out in his recent article in The Atlantic, the very point of it all is to have less information, to conduct fewer studies, to collect fewer samples, to find fewer outbreaks. The absence of information does not confirm that something doesn't exist, but the Trump regime has made a habit over the last decade of pointing to a lack of evidence as positive proof that something is true. The less information they collect on foodborne illnesses, the more opportunity they have to say, under the Trump administration, foodborne illnesses have dramatically decreased. As Trump extracts experts and scientists from all areas of the federal government, the data the government presents is going to be, and probably already is, less and less reliable. The second reason for scaling back tracking and announcing foodborne illnesses is that part of that process involves identifying the source of the outbreak and publicizing the name of the company. That, of course, becomes thorny when a small handful of companies own the vast market share of any given food in the country. The billionaires running Cargill or Tyson or Kraft Heinz are not going to be too happy with their friend the Donald if his USDA is constantly up their butt about such inconveniences as sanitation and making sure their food isn't covered with literal feces. The point of the government is to look out for the people, but the neoliberal free market laissez-faire believers who argue that everything should be privatized in order to run more efficiently appear unconcerned with the fact that monitoring for food safety is actually not often the most economically viable option for a company. It is the fear of regulation, of naming and shaming, of facing genuine consequences that inspires companies to invest the time and money into making sure their food doesn't make people sick. Because when you already have a monopoly on the market, consumers have no choices. They can't simply say, that meat made me sick last month. I'm going to buy from somewhere else, because there is nowhere else. At least not meaningfully in a way that's affordable for the average consumer. Instead of attempting to improve the very real threat of foodborne illnesses in this country, the ones that literally kill thousands of people, especially children and the elderly, RFK Jr. is obsessed with things like reducing access to vaccines, fluoride in the water, and removing artificial dyes from our food. And listen, I'm all for banning artificial dyes. Studies have linked them to negative health outcomes. They're banned in a lot of countries. I think it's a perfectly reasonable thing to want to do. But when you're focused on dyes that might cause migraines and fluoride that prevents literal millions of cavities per year, especially in lower income children, while also defunding important agencies tasked with preventing people from ingesting literal shit and dying, clearly the plot has been entirely lost. And this phenomenon represents a larger trend in public health in this country, one that MAGA and MAHA have picked up and run with, wherein the very basic public services necessary for preventing death and misery for millions, things like Medicare and Medicaid, which provide for basic health care for the country's poorest people, regulating the cost of insulin to ensure people have access to, the things that they require for just basic survival, things like that, those are being cut in the interest of downsizing governments, avoiding tax hikes, and privatizing healthcare so big pharma can make even more money, and ensuring that this country never slides into the communist hellscape that universal healthcare would bring about, God forbid. Meanwhile, those in charge of ensuring positive health outcomes for millions are more interested in providing services to and protecting people who are already wealthy, who have the money to pay for it. Someone barely scraping by on food stamps is not necessarily sitting around thinking about red dye 40 in their kids' breakfast cereal. They're worried about paying for basic healthcare. But the wealthy Gwyneth Paltrow goop acolytes who already have the basics of their physical health covered through expensive private health insurance and the luxury of time to think about things like food additives or vaginal facials or whatever else latest thing Gwyneth is hawking this month, who have the time and money to shop local at the farmer's market and their organic food co-op, they're the only ones that benefit from a government intent on slashing basic consumer protections and food safety guidelines while promoting wellness trends and regulations around things poor people don't have the time, energy, or money to give a shit about.
At Vistaprint, we print signs so people can see your brand up close. But we also print signs so that people can see your business here, see it here, and see it here, so you stand out, even when they're way back here. Get 20% off signs and banners at Vistaprint.com.
Okay, for game night?
Royal Kingdom is a brand new puzzle game that just launched, so we don't need these.
Wait, what? Hey!
Or these.
Those are my games.
I told you, all we need is Royal Kingdom. You can build kingdoms by solving puzzles. Here.
Oh, wow, that is fun.
Yeah.
You're right. We don't need these games.
And it's free to download.
Well, don't need these.
You don't even need Wi-Fi.
See you later, router.
And best of all, no ads.
No ads.
You got, back it up, back it up.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no.
This also follows a trend I've personally noticed in wellness influencers on social media, one that is a microcosm of a larger wellness industry intent on inventing ever more fringe and ludicrous procedures and products to sell to a public that is growing statistically sicker and desperate to feel better. But instead of the basics, things that aren't flashy or profit generating, things like ensuring people are eating enough fiber, something that can easily be done through increasing fruit and vegetable intake, and something that the vast majority of Americans dramatically underconsume. Most Americans are eating about half of the recommended daily dose of 14 grams per 1,000 calories, and this can have far-ranging impacts. Studies show a 10% reduction in all-cause mortality risk for each 10 gram per day increase in fiber intake. So statistically speaking, if every American increased their fiber intake by 10 grams per day, which is the equivalent of adding 2 cups of broccoli or 1.25 cup of raspberries or 3/4 cup of black beans to their daily food intake, all-cause mortality risk would drop significantly. But that's not sexy or easy to package and then sell at a premium. Big Broccoli isn't out there scheming up ways to make broccoli sexier so they can mark up the price. Instead, major marketing companies and the fitness influencers who peddle their shit are convincing everyday Americans that all their ills can be fixed if they just take super greens powders or other supplements that are based on shaky at best science, have hardly any quality control, and take food that would provide your daily needed fiber intake and grind it down to a low fiber powder. Pay no attention to the fact that this tub of super greens is $30 while a literal pound of broccoli is less than $3. And that's just one example of the myriad ways quote unquote health has been repackaged so companies can make a quick buck, while the actual programs that can significantly impact health outcomes, SNAP benefits, free meals for children, increasing access to fresh produce in low-income neighborhoods, are being slashed by the government to avoid having to charge taxes on the obscenely high incomes of the very people making their fortunes off peddling this fake health shit to all of us. And this is, of course, all premised on the very MAGA belief that everything is based on individual decisions. If you're fat, that's because you're a moral failure, you're lazy, you haven't tried, you want to take advantage of the system. Have you just tried taking a super green supplement, a daily ice-cold shower for cold exposure, and then getting a half-hour run in before work every day? Have you not just tried that? Fuck your childhood trauma, fuck your poverty, fuck your disability. Those are all just excuses for not living up to your full health potential. MAGA and the MAHA movement seem allergic to the idea that systems have a greater impact on overall health outcomes than individual decisions do. If people could just choose to be healthy, do you not think that they would? MAGA is living in a fantasy land where there's a huge group of lazy, morally inferior people who are perfectly capable of living productive, healthy lives and are just choosing not to because of their own moral failings. And so cutting SNAP and rolling back food safety bureaucracy is righteous payback for those mooches who'll have to just suck it up and get a job and stop spending their SNAP dollars on sody pops. And so it's no wonder, given this shift away from programs and systems meant to help provide people with basic health improvements and towards a new MAHA future wherein alternative medicine and supplements and wellness practices take priority, that we have Dr. Oz leading Medicare and Medicaid, and wellness influencer Casey Means newly nominated for Surgeon General. Literal celebrities and influencers peddling bullshit, but, make it the federal government. In the face of all of this food safety chaos, I have personally been wondering what are the best ways to keep myself and my family safe from foodborne illnesses, because I can't trust the government anymore. Here's what I found. First, getting a meat thermometer a couple years ago was a game changer for my peace of mind. It allows me to ensure that I have thoroughly cooked my meat. I do love a medium rare steak, but I will likely be foregoing the undercooked meats for the foreseeable future, frankly. I'm definitely going to take thoroughly washing my produce a lot more seriously, because dangerous outbreaks from E. coli and salmonella are often more prevalent from produce than from meat. I also have been growing my own little garden lately. I started harvesting kale and herbs and radishes, and there are beans and tomatoes and cucumbers on the way. The less transport time and processing, the better, because it provides for fewer opportunities for bacteria to grow and less cross-contamination. I found this old but handy guide to washing produce, which confirms that commercial fruit and vegetable cleaning solutions are not necessarily safe, and the best method for cleaning anything produce-wise is to wait to wash it until you're ready to eat it, because introducing moisture could create more bacteria while it sits in your fridge. Give everything a good scrub with your hands, or if the produce skin can handle it, a brush. Dry everything thoroughly, and if you want to take the extra step, you can soak leafy greens in distilled vinegar, though it could affect the taste. Once again, as I've said about so many things with this administration, it is so stupid that this is the timeline we're living in, that we as individuals, on top of existing in our daily lives, are also now tasked with taking extra precautions to ensure the food safety that our government is supposed to provide. And as with most of these cuts, it is certainly the most vulnerable populations in the US that will be hurt the most. The ones that don't have the time or money or capacity to go to a farmer's market and then come home and soak their greens in vinegar. But taking these extra sanitizing steps is what's going to help give me the peace of mind to continue existing in these United States, given the new cuts to our country's extensive and essential food safety apparatus. If you want to support my work, all my videos are completely ad-free and uncensored over on Patreon, patreon.com/LegiaMiller. Thank you to my multi-platinum patrons, Mark, Sarah Shelby, Travis, Art, David, RH, Latranger Lucas, Thomas Johnson, and Tay. Your generosity makes this channel what it is, so thank you. And if you like this episode, you'll like the one from earlier this week, all about habeas corpus. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Hey man, I'm not gonna hurt you. What is going on?
You saw how clean this place was coming in?
Yes, sir.
Your job is to keep it that way.
And no fourth floor, darling. Those patients need special care. Off limits to you.
These are good people. They deserve comfort in their twilight years.
Here to get your garbage.
You know, you've got interesting eyes.
There's something very wrong with this place. Something terribly wrong.
Hey man, I'm not gonna hurt you.
It's time to play by the rules. What is going on? Sometimes, when things are bad on the outside,
Hi, you're tuned into Why America. My name's Legia Miller. Let's get started. To understand the widespread chaos so far in the Trump administration,
what we're doing is handing a weapon to the government that can be whatever the government wants. And when that weapon targets speech and ideas, it's a real big problem.
Welcome back to Free Speech Friday. Today, I want to talk to you guys about one of the most dangerous laws in Congress right now. It's called the Kids Online Safety Act, and it was recently reintroduced by a bipartisan group of lawmakers, but it's being heavily pushed by the Democrats. It's a law that claims to make kids safer online, but please don't let the name fool you, because this law would give the government unprecedented power to censor speech across the entire internet in the name of protecting kids. From mental health support communities to LGBTQ forums, COSA endangers the very spaces that young people turn to for help, identity, and connection. The Heritage Foundation has come out and said that it plans to use COSA to censor LGBTQ content off the internet. And Marsha Blackburn, the bill's co-sponsor, said that COSA must be passed in order to, quote, protect minor children from the transgender in this culture. Today, to help me break the whole bill down, is Ari Cohen from the Foundation for Individual Rights and Freedom. He's a brilliant tech policy expert and one of the foremost free speech lawyers in the country. Ari, welcome to Free Speech Friday.
Thanks for having me.
I feel like you and I have discussed COSA before on this very podcast, I think.
Too many times.
Okay, so this law sounds pretty good, I think, to a lot of people that don't know what's going on. Why is it so dangerous? Walk me through kind of the biggest reason why COSA is so harmful and will lead to such censorship.
So the law includes something that's called a duty of care, and it requires social media platforms basically to protect people against certain kinds of harms like anxieties, suicidal ideations, eating disorders, things like that. That requires platforms to look at content and say, this is going to cause someone harm. And if it is, what they're going to do is they are going to stop kids from seeing it because they could get in trouble if it causes some kind of damage, or even the government thinks that it might.
So I want to give people a concrete example, because when you say it requires the platforms to prevent showing harmful content, that sounds good, right? Give me an example of how that might play out in a negative way. Because I think the biggest issue here is that platforms, what someone considers harmful content, especially under the Trump administration, is LGBTQ content, right?
That's exactly right. And this duty, it applies to the design features. So say the content recommendation system, the algorithm that provides you what's on your feed. Take the example you just gave, LGBT content. There is a contingent on the right that thinks that kids are turning trans just because they read things on the internet. Say the Attorney General of the United States sends a letter to Facebook saying, this is harmful material for children. What's Facebook going to do? They're going to tailor the content recommendation system so that it excludes anything related to being transgender whatsoever, because that is the safest thing for them to do, so nobody can say you're causing kids harm. Which means you're not going to see any trans-related content if you're a minor, which means if you are trans, you might think you are all alone. You are not going to be able to find support, community, resources, or anything like that in the way that I, as a little gay kid in a religious Jewish community who had never even heard of the fact there were other gay people, was able to find support and community on the internet when I was a kid. We're basically going backwards.
Yeah, and especially I think to do it at this time when we know other stuff that's considered harmful content is reproductive justice content, information about women's health care, anything about women's issues, civil liberties, social justice issues. These are all considered sort of harmful content, anxiety inducing.
And what's harmful content will grow and change and morph with whatever the subjective values of the person doing the determination is at any given time. And Republicans should probably beware as well, because when Democrats get elected into office again, should they ever decide they want to win an election, what's going to happen? They're going to target stuff that the right likes and say that's harmful to minors. What we're doing is handing a weapon to the government that can be whatever the government wants. And when that weapon targets speech and ideas, it's a real big problem.
Well, let's talk about some of those problems, because everything you just said, I think, again, to people sounds great, right? Like all they hear about all day is the harms of these platforms. And obviously these platforms do a lot of really nefarious bad things. But this law, I would argue, is really dangerous and bad. Number one is the censorship, right? Like this is essentially a coded censorship bill. So can you sort of walk me through how that sort of like duty of care could be weaponized to silence speech?
Quite easily, in fact. First of all, the original version of KOSA didn't revolve around quote unquote design features. What it did was it imposed a duty of care to prevent and mitigate those classifications of harm. And
we starting our own label. I'm calling the shots now. I'm the face of this organization. You always gonna be in my shadow.
Style and substance. In the GMC Sierra. Or get 0.9% APR on these Sierra models. Or current eligible GMC owners get over $7,800 total value.
That initially drew criticism, including from me, because a duty of care means platforms, first of all, they have to figure out how users will reasonably react to certain content. And the problem with all of these kids' bills so far is that they treat minors as a monolith. They treat them as a big group that all have the same interests and the same mental state, the same capacity, and it requires them to treat them all the same. But different kids, particularly with respect to, say, a 14-year-old versus a 17-year-old, have different reactions, different experiences, different ways they manage and cope with different content. And even within the same age range, different kids are different. They have different life experiences. They don't all react to content in the same way. So how platforms are supposed to figure it out for kids as a whole, I don't know. The alternative is that social media platforms have to be each kid's virtual psychiatrist. And if you don't trust social media companies to be taking care of kids in the first place, I don't know why you would trust them to do that. Either way, it's an impossibility. So what results from that is that platforms have to basically restrict for minors everything but the safest content.
When you say safest, like what does that even mean?
That's a great question. I don't know. Basically, like the content that would not even set off a reaction in even the most sensitive kid. And that's basically nothing. And we've been here before. Parents have tried to sue broadcasters, video game makers, the makers of Dungeons and Dragons for quote unquote harming kids. And the courts have all rejected the duty of care on First Amendment grounds because they've said that would basically restrict allowable speech to the most sensitive members of society. So what did the COSA sponsors decide to do? They made it, instead of directly about the content, they said, okay, this is only about design features. And to some people, that would seem to make sense. But let me read you again. Take reasonable care in the creation and implementation of any design feature to prevent and mitigate, say, mental health disorders, including anxiety, depression, eating disorders, substance use disorders, and suicidal behavior. So take infinite scroll, because that's usually cited as one of these design features.
And just infinite scroll means basically a feed that continues to refresh.
Right. So I'm not sure how infinite scroll, if you don't consider the content at all, could possibly cause an eating disorder. It would always have to do with the content that is displayed. And also, the fact of the matter is, Twitter's feed, Facebook's wall, what have you, those are all also design features. There is no way to mitigate against these harms, that they're very content-based harms, without considering the content, because features don't do anything to kids at all. They're just there.
Let's kind of put this a lot more in layman's terms. What you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, is they've tried to sort of reform this bill, which was essentially, it sort of fell off the map initially because it was very obviously a censorship bill. Now they're back saying we're not regulating the content, we're regulating these dangerous features, like keeping kids scrolling forever and these dangerous design features. And this is what you hear also from these groups that I deeply disagree with, design it for us. And they're it's the features that are the problem, not the content. But as you're saying, you can't really decouple the two, because a feature in itself isn't inherently harmful. It's the content that it's delivering that is being litigated.
I always tell people, if we were in a situation where social media presented nothing but educational content and funny cat videos, and kids were staying up late at night under their comforter, unable to sleep because they're too busy learning from social media, and they were sleeping too much during class because they were up late all night learning, would we have this same panic? No, we wouldn't. It is all about the content, and they barely try to hide it, and now they're trying just a little bit, and it's still completely insufficient, because really what they're going after is the content. And if there's one thing that the First Amendment doesn't allow, it is the suppression of content just because the government finds it objectionable or harmful. And that's what this bill does. And it gives the government a ton of power to decide for everyone what that harmful content is.
I think that's actually such a good way to think about it, because I think actually that's maybe a good test for any of these internet laws is if the content on these apps was, as you said, the most wholesome educational videos ever, would this law still be necessary? And no, it wouldn't. I think there's also just a lot that's sort of presupposed in this law. For instance, the idea that social media is inherently harmful and dangerous, and it's leading to compulsive usage and all of these other things. The eating disorder stuff drives me crazy, because I grew up also in the aughts, where when I was a kid, all we had were these magazines that promoted the most blatant eating disorder. The entire media promoted eating disorders. And in fact, we have the body positivity movement because of social media. And young girls today especially, are exposed to more diverse body types because of the internet. And yet we see this sort of trope that the internet is leading kids into these things.
How soon we forget even very recent history. There's also the quote unquote addictive feeds issue. And I am not sure if these people are consumers of any kind of media, because the entire purpose of media is to keep your eyeballs and your attention. And that's why we have cliffhangers at the end of episodes. That is why we have, say, commercials that tease episodes and automatic play of the next episode. It's because the entire purpose of media is to keep you watching. And if you try and say that is inherently a bad thing, then where do we go from there? Because what you're saying basically is that addiction to ideas is a thing. I don't want to live in a world where that is a legally cognizable thing, because that is terrifying.
It's even worse than that too, because they're not just saying that you're addicted to consuming information and entertainment or whatever, which is absurd on its face. Like you said, it's you're addicted to reading. It's also addicted to communication. I think of Tristan Harris, who I deeply disagree with, talking about Snapchat's streaks.
Simply having a wonderful programming time. His eyes were heavy. He wants to finish this up so he can start training stuff. Ready for you. Muted like you are.